Good afternoon. Thanks for spending the afternoon with us here, or an hour and 15 minutes of that. My name's Keith Brinsenhoff.
I'm Aran Dvir, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules here today to join us.
So the focus of our discussion today is based on some of the changes in the engineering systems for Microsoft. We've been working very closely with our customers, even from the early stages of Azure Active Directory and the premium services that are related to it. And part of the thing, because we're really in the trenches with the customers, we have some kind of pretty compelling stories. But one of the most important ones that I wanted to talk about is basically a quote here I took from a gentleman that was in a room just like this, when he was saying, like, wow, I understand it now. As I move to the cloud, what used to be very long lead time, very intensive planning, very time-consuming efforts to roll and deploy something out, now I can begin to take simple chunks and be able to execute on those and add value to my company earlier and faster. And that's really the theme of this discussion here, grounding the discussion in what customers are trying to do, and then actually diving into some detail about how you could actually do it for yourself as well and for your own company. So I want to ground it all. The whole focus of our work here is really enabling enterprise mobility. In the world of cloud and devices, there's the user side of it, which users want to get at their apps, at their data, with any device they want, whenever they want to do it, wherever they are. The IT has a kind of sometimes a competing side of it, which is like, hey, how do I have the right controls and the right enablement to make sure I get security and compliance? Well, some of the core pieces of that are come together in the Enterprise Mobility Suite, which has both the device management, the remote app, information protection, but from our point of view, the most important one, which is the focus on identity access management, and that's the focus of our talk today. And also, when we have this world where the users are gaining access to the resources wherever they are and whatever apps that they want to do, you end up with a chaotic world like this. And this chaotic world, really needs some form of control. And when we're looking at our work, we really see it as being the foundation of moving from a case of chaotic access to applications and data to one under control, where identity is the foundation. And basically it starts with, first of all, your on-premises world, you have Active Directory, other directories, applications, and you're then looking at this world of the cloud. And when Microsoft is talking about the world of the cloud here, it's not just O365, it's not just the applications that we provide, but it's the world of applications, including Salesforce, Concur, Italio, and literally the thousands and thousands of more. So what you do is then you bring in Active Directory Azure Active Directory as the core, and think about this as basically the extension of AD to Azure Active Directory for new scenarios, right? And one of the core new scenarios is single sign-on to applications. And so, this functionality enables you to get just the attributes and just the users you want into Azure to give them access to the applications. And then in addition, when you made this foundation here, you can add self-service to this as well, right? And all this whole experience, right, is bound up not just outbound towards the applications in the external world, but also now enabling you to have self-service and application access to the on-prem as well. And we'll have a lot of good showpieces of that. And actually, just to make this real for you, we'll just switch over to a demonstration of what the end user experience of this slide looks like.
Okay, so I'm here in the login screen for my end user. You can see my login experience is branded to my company. I can see my company logos, my company name, simple login, just like everywhere else. And like most other users in the world, the first thing I do in the morning when I log into my computer is go to my mailbox. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Conveniently, though, all of my applications are now available through that same Office 365 experience. And so From my mailbox, I can very easily now go into my HR application, make sure that my paycheck is coming in on time. Not that that's important. And while that's loading, or here it is, I can also look at some communications I got, and I can see that I've been invited to join an enterprise social group, which has permissions to use a corporate Twitter account. And so clicking on that link, I have a simple option to join the group. Of course, the corporate Twitter account is a sensitive resource, and so I can't just join the group. But I can request it, so I'll make it simple. Please. And submit the request. Going into the user that actually owns that group, that actually owns the permissions to the Twitter account, you can see I'm still in an end user experience. So it doesn't require an administrator to jump in here and use administrative tools in order to sort this out. That user, her name is Audrey Oliver, has received an email stating that Keith requested to join the Twitter group. She can act on the request from the email. It opens up the right portal. And view all the requests that she has there. She can see that there are a number of requests. One of them is from Keith. And she can approve or deny it. In this case, she'll approve it because we want to keep the demo moving along. And going back to Keith now, I expect the application to show up, but over here on the waffle in the top left, only applications that are used frequently show up. Since this is a new application, it doesn't come up yet, but by going to all of the applications view, I can view all the applications I'm assigned to in Office 365 or any other application I'm assigned to through Azure AD. I can see Twitter is here now. I could click on it and get access to the corporate Twitter account. Now, I did all of that just by simply logging in with my corporate username and password. That's neat. I can also pin it to my launch bar, to my launch pad. And in the future, if I'm an avid Twitter, I'll be able to access it much more quickly. So that's very briefly the end user experience, and I'll hand over back to Keith to continue.
Yeah, the final grounding discussion we have before we jump into the details is, as we look at this, we will see how customers take in particular cuts at this and focus in a certain area. But the overall view of the application lifecycle that they're dealing with is basically, you start with, you have to understand what applications do I have? What applications are my end users using? What applications are important to me? And then you discover them and you get them under control. And you do that through the managing part, right, where you begin to assign the users to the applications. We'll go into a lot more depth on this, and then give them the single sign-on for that. The end user experience is one password for all the applications. It's easy to discover the applications, a single sign-on from devices like iPhones and Androids. So it basically gives you a comprehensive view. And while that's going on, while all this access is going on, while your company's being productive, you also have the ability to monitor, ensure you're keeping track of what's going on and getting good feedback around both the business usage as well as the security-oriented usage of the applications. So this gives you a feel of the end-to-end view, and we're going to dive in a little more as we go. And basically what we're looking for is really identifying some really clear and useful actions that you can do. And you can do these actions to make an impact to your company today, right? And so we'll break it into three parts. The first part is the very common starting point, which is addressing shadow IT, right? This is an area where there's massive use and uptake of applications, and how can your IT organization, which is responsible for ensuring the security and the productivity of the company, how can you gain control of that? After that, managing at scale, how can you begin to automate the system for the provisioning and the access to these applications for the user? And then finally, when you get your security group, your compliance group get involved, how can you really address those issues very simply? And all of this in little chunks that you can actually get started right away with. So what I'll do is I'll talk through 3 customers and the problems that they brought to us, and then we'll kind of look at like what are actually the tools that they used and how they went ahead and executed on this. So the first one was a large retailer, a grocery chain based in Texas, very large, like 170,000 users, right? And a small case first came in was that the sales team came and said their Salesforce admin had left the company and they were out of luck, right? They really had no way to control a Salesforce. So the IT had a wake-up call because that was something that were just letting go for a while there, and now it became very clear that for the company they had to take an action. So then they had to say, well, if that's the case, well, how many other apps are going? So then they basically rolled out piloted the SaaS app discovery capability that we'll show you here. And based on that, they were able to identify over 47 file sharing apps, right? So at first they went in with the Salesforce problem, and now they understood now we have our data problem that's everywhere. And by starting to get those apps under control and connected into Azure Active Directory, they were able to address this problem. The second one, you saw a demo of this here, was Twitter is an amazing tool, and companies really love the kind of connection that they have with their customers. But it's frightful when a disgruntled employee who left the company, when somebody has stolen a credential and using the credentials, the impact on the company brand. It really is a New York Times class story. So this supply chain management said like, hey, we're at risk here. We have so many of these usernames. Our marketing team is sending them out to people in email. Like, we don't know what is going on here. And they literally needed to address their board and find out what was happening. So we'll show you a little bit here. But in the end, what was really funny is that afterwards, it wasn't just like IT as control. It was actually like the end users were saying like, thank you. Now I don't have to keep up with the username and the password and who has it now and who changed it and that type of thing. So it was super valuable for them from a productivity perspective as well as the security impact. And the fourth one was a service provider here. That supply chain is based in the southeast of the United States. Now, service provider here. This one here is. They have been asked to get more control over application access. And literally, they were also told they actually had been divested from another company. So they had a smaller IT organization asked to do more. They were like, you've got to be kidding, guys. I don't know how we're ever going to do that. And so the kind of functionality they did was like, hey, let's find a way to super simple, make it easy for pushing out the ownership of the access to the applications and make it very simple in a web experience with low cost and no additional IT kind of cost, if you will, in terms of their time and their manpower. And what happened there in that, they actually turned around their perception within the organization where like IT had been saying no because they just didn't have time or they could give the effort to be able to gain control over this and solve the problem for their end users and for their management. But in the end, they were able to access this. And let's actually take a look at some of those things that we've just talked about and looked at the tools and the actions, like literally the steps the company took to address these specific problems. So first off, we'll go with Cloud App Discovery. So Cloud App Discovery, this is step one. In fact, when we were designing this systems a couple of years ago, Scott Guthrie was in Australia, and he was talking to a large government body there, and he was talking with them, and they said, "Stop, Scott. I don't even know what apps we have. I have no idea what's going on, right?" And that was the genesis of really this kind of thing, because we found this over and over. How do I even start the process? So with Cloud App Discovery, you can begin to discover all the cloud apps that are being used within your organization. You can find the popular ones. You can measure the app usage by the number of users, the data volume. You identify which users are using the app. And then you can be very clear about and specifying the data, what are the policies that are associated with this. And you're actually looking at this. What we found is that you're addressing both business and security here. Right? On the security side, like who's using what, where's our data going, is out distributed on the web. But then you end up on the business side, like who's using the apps, what kind of licensing use cases we have, those types of, it's amazing that oftentimes this is brought up because there's a security issue, but the benefits can be from a productivity and business as well. You know, it's obviously very simple to export this to power BI analytics on this, as well as take advantage of just the built-in analytics that are in the tool itself. And then when you found these apps, it's super simple to connect directly from within this experience to connect those applications to Azure Active Directory and gain the benefits of single sign-on and the reporting and the security. So the basis right now, basically, it's a very simple tool. It's an agent-based discovery. And you basically take the agent, you distribute it to a number of the desktops, and it captures the relevant app traffic on the machine, right? And it's focusing on HTTP and HTTPS, and you know, and it gains the URLs, the HTTP headers, the metadata, the username, and the machine name, right? And then that gets pumped up to the cloud, and that's where you get the good reporting on this. In the near future, there'll be a gateway based, right, for Windows and iOS. And what this really starts to give you is a little more breadth in terms of the applications, right? But it's really kind of focused on the on-premises access. One of the benefits of the desktop agent or you know, your mobile laptop is that you're getting the apps that people are accessing, the business apps they're accessing while they're working from home as well. Now, as I said earlier, what we found is that many companies, you don't have to roll this out widely, right? Literally, you can put it on 100 or 150 desktops if you can start with your own IT group and just put it on a number of desktops, begin to see the reports, and you'll begin to see the value and begin to see what is going on in your organization, right? And in fact, you find that there's a bit of a tail. You get a real spike in the number of applications that you find. After a while, it starts to tail off. That first grouping, right, enables you to make a lot of analysis of the number of applications that I'm doing, the number of subscriptions that I'm having, what are those that are most risky for me, and that type of thing. And basically, a lot of people just get to the partial deployment and begin to take actions right away, right? So you can actually literally get this set up and going in an afternoon, right? And start to watch a portal for what's going on in the weeks that follow. So this is like super simple to get onto the desktop, super simple to start to seeing the output, and then you get some really nice detailed reports, and then can take actions as well on that. So that first company, that's exactly what they did. We actually really worked closely with them because we really wanted to learn from them what their analysis showed them and those types of things, and this is the kind of thing we'll get a lot of more information out to you about that as well. But you can start today with Cloud App Discovery.
Thanks, Keith. Doing a quick time check here, we're about 20 minutes in. We're just getting started, so we're going to pick up the pace a little bit. That requires all of you to pick up a little bit of the energy. I know it's right in the middle of the show. It's mid-afternoon on Wednesday. It's well, the temperatures are okay outside, so we'll deal with that. But how many of you think that this is useful, that this is something you'll go out and do right away? I mean, it will take you 15 minutes to start learning about which SaaS applications are actually being used in your organization. Anyone? Okay. That's great. I see about 40% of the hands. That's wonderful. This is what we're going to be doing for the next hour. We'll be taking you through a handful of items. Each one of them will be a quick and easy win for you. Each one of them can be combined with a whole bunch of other things and will give you great victories. Now that you know all about those apps that you have in your organization, you'll very quickly discover that there are a lot of apps that you didn't know about and you have no control about, and this is really concerning. We generally find, by the way, that companies that know how many applications they have find an order of magnitude more applications than they knew about. So it's an interesting thing to play with. But going from those unmanaged applications, the real question is, okay, what do I do now? So there are a couple of key concepts I wanted you to know about. In order to manage those applications, you want to start controlling who has access to them, at least knowing, controlling, viewing who's using them. You're going to want to be able to provision accounts in and out of the application is sometimes more important. Knowing that if a user switches jobs or leaves the organization, they no longer have an account on that SaaS application. And so we need to deal with provisioning. Your users are going to want to be able to log in with their corporate accounts, not carry around that phone book with all of the accounts, single sign-on. And you'll be doing it through applications that were pre-integrated with Azure AD, applications that you add on your own by developing them, or applications that you add through customized application adding for either federated or password single sign-on. Finally, Keith mentioned, and we showed earlier Twitter, there's also the notion of shared accounts, where you have a single account that you want to share across multiple individuals, and we'll cover all of those in the next several minutes. Outbound provisioning. This is a really neat feature. This means that you can delegate to an end user the ability to create new accounts in complex SaaS applications. How many of you ever tried to use some of the SaaS applications out there? Salesforce, Workday, etc. I've been playing around with Workday. You'll see it a little later in the presentation. It turns out it's really hard. HR is really hard work. But provisioning. With provisioning, the user doesn't need to go into that application to learn how to create new user accounts, to create them consistently or inconsistently, to distribute passwords to the individuals. You can delegate to an end user the permission to manage who has access to Salesforce by assigning someone in a similar way to what I did earlier in the demo. That user account will then be provisioned into the application. You can control which attributes from Azure AD will flow into that application, how they map, and whether they need to be transformed in flight. If a user account is disabled, removed, changed position, doesn't meet the rules anymore, or the user in charge decides they shouldn't have access anymore, their account gets disabled in these appropriate applications. You get reports on all of this, and you just don't need to worry about it anymore. Now, we mentioned quick wins. The easiest thing to do is if you don't have Salesforce yet and your company says, oh, we want Salesforce or other applications, you can very easily sign up to that subscription. Just add the credentials to Azure AD. It will take exactly 15 seconds, and you will be set up and running. Any user assigned will be provisioned. Any user removed. If you already have Salesforce, if things get a little trickier, it might take you 10 minutes. You'll need to scrutinize the accounts that already exist in Salesforce, figure out where the provisioning practices, that is, that individual who was creating manual accounts in Salesforce, how they created the username, is it related in any way to the actual user's information, which other information did they provision. You'll figure all of that out because you'll want to adjust the attribute flows in order to match it. Once you do all of that, you enable it, just like in the new service option. And those accounts that are there will be automatically matched to the Azure AD accounts based on the rules that you set up. From there on, that's it. It's managed. You're in control, or the person responsible for that application is in control. You can move on. So before I go on, anyone find this useful? I'm getting a cold feeling here. OK. License management. Oh, thank you very much. One person found it useful. Victor.
To me, it seems like we're talking about completely separate non-corporate accounts that exist on, call it Salesforce, whatever, right? And how are we migrating those to corporate accounts?
No, so
You actually lose the old account, you get a new account, their personal data or whatever they had is gone, and maybe I'm not getting it.
No, I'm actually glad. I didn't plan to take any questions during the session, but I'm glad you asked that. No, the notion is, look, users have their own accounts in some cloud applications. Personal accounts, each corporation has its own policy for what's their personal web browsing practices. I don't want to know. You don't want to know. Even if you allow it, you probably don't care. What we're looking at here is those organizations within your company that set up a company subscription to SaaS applications. This happens all the time. That Twitter account I showed you before, that wasn't Keith's personal email, a Twitter account. That was Wingtip Toys' Twitter account. That's that famous Twitter account that when you fire Keith next week, he's going to tweet, Wingtip Toys is the worst company in the world, and they just fired me because they're mean. You don't want that. The Salesforce accounts that I mentioned, this is a Salesforce subscription that the marketing or sales team set up on their own. They set it up because of shadow IT. They wanted something quick. They decided they liked Salesforce. They pulled out their credit card. They set up a Salesforce subscription. And that's it. A couple of months later, the person who was provisioning accounts into it up and left the company, switched positions. They decided they wanted single sign-on. They come knocking on IT door. What do we do with this now? This is how you can solve their problem in 5 minutes, but you don't only solve their problem. You actually discovered that they were using Salesforce because of Cloud App Discovery. So even if they didn't come knocking on your door, you know they're using Salesforce. Salesforce is not a personal application. It's an organizational one. That means there is organizational information on Salesforce. Well, then we can approach the marketing team now. You've been using Salesforce. Can we help you? We'll get governance. You'll get single sign-on. Everybody goes home happy. Okay, so no, these are not at all intended to be those personal accounts. You can use this for personal accounts, so people who want to single sign on to their personal Facebook can do that if your corporate policy allows it. But this solves your problem for those organizational SaaS applications.
That sounds great. So let's do the next step here.
Cool. Very quickly, license management. Consistently with the way we do outbound provisioning and application assignment, you can also assign licenses. So Enterprise Mobility, Azure AD Premium, Microsoft Intune, or Office 365 licenses can be assigned by rules. Their assignment can be delegated to individuals in the way we showed earlier, or can be assigned to a fixed set of people from a group provisioned from AD on premises. Outbound single sign-on, what do all of these assignments amount to? They all amount to the fact that the user can log in with their one AD account and get access to all of these applications. Outbound single sign-on supports password single sign-on, federated single sign-on across many standards. It can come in conjunction with protection features like conditional access, and then some of these we'll touch on with additional information later on. You can single sign on from all major devices, so all mobile devices, all major browsers in computers and non-Microsoft computers, whatever those are. Finally, shared accounts. I mentioned this is a case where multiple users can access a single account resource. Again, you can assign it broadly. You can delegate the assignment as you've seen. You can protect it with conditional access or multi-factor authentication. And so all of these application assignment concepts come together to a single consistent paradigm. And where I wanted to focus that paradigm right now is, in most cases, IT doesn't actually know who needs to access the Twitter account, or who should have their own Salesforce account, or any other SaaS application. And so what do? Well, there are different paradigms of how to deal with it. We'll deal with a few more later. But a common one is where there is an individual somewhere out there in the company who knows, who has the responsibility to decide who has access to the corporate Twitter account. What we want to enable is delegation of the assignment to the application to that individual. We showed you that quickly in the demo. And I just wanted to break down the logic here. You, IT, the administrators, maintain control of which groups are assigned to which applications. You maintain control of which users have responsibility over those groups. You hand over control over membership in the groups and the join policy. And the end user themselves can also request to join, as you've seen, or join automatically depending on the policy. And so what you're doing here is distributing the workload across the organization to the right individuals. So you don't get phone calls in the middle of the night saying, I really need access to Twitter. What's the username and password? Somebody can submit the request and it will be handled by the right people. Good? Cool. Useful? By show of hands? Much better. Now I'm getting excited again. So with that, we'll move on. How does that delegation actually work? We showed you that briefly, and so I'll let it run on the side while I talk. An end user finds the group that they want to join. They request to join it. An approval is sent to the group owners. There could be multiple. They make a decision on whether to approve or deny. Based on their approval or denial, the user does or does not get access. Click on the icon and go to the application. It's all very straightforward. Users don't need any specialized training to be able to deal with this. which again reduces the burden on the IT organization. We promised you that these are quick wins. You can do this in less than 5 minutes. That means you can delegate the responsibility for the Twitter account, gain control over that Twitter account, you start to gain monitoring over who's using that Twitter account, as an example, all in under 5 minutes. How do you do this? You go into your Azure Active Directory, you enable advanced groups through delegated group setting. You then go into the Groups tab, create a new group, assign owners to that group, and assign the group to one or more applications that you want those owners to be responsible for. From that point on, the owners can manage membership as well as the policy, and you're done. So this is really something you can do in a couple of minutes. Okay? Great. Moving on.
So let's switch gears here a little bit. But, so these are sort of the first functional areas that we wanted. Then we had a large UK retailer, right? Another very large one. And up to a certain amount of time, the IT department did not take care of all what they call the floor workers. That was all done like just very like Excel spreadsheets and stuff that they never had to deal with. Management said that's not possible. We have to change that, right? And the second thing they said, hey, we have to get up to date. These floor workers have a lot of choice in this world, so they want to be able to get like a cool app, an app that they can get access to, they keep track of each other and their friends and that kind of thing, and make the retailer more up to date, right? So they want the kind of cool app experience that all of their friends have as they go into the normal consumer life. The second one was a global nonprofit. This was an interesting case where they've given a mailbox, an Office 365 mailbox, to their distributed kind of basically like a medical and care organization. They give an inbox to everybody, but they also had to give them access to applications, right? But because these people might be going up to a kiosk or others, they couldn't like distribute like, oh, you have links to this app here, or you have to download that app there. They just needed that the in-house experience, if you will. So they were in Office 365, they sign in, they have the app hub, and it just solved their problem, right? They literally then, the end users have the complete and productivity work experience in one place, and then they could add apps. You'll see how we're going to add other apps to that as well. In construction, right, this was another case, and I think kind of core to each of these was the large organization, the IT department didn't get a big budget to start managing all of these users. The global nonprofit had no money, right, and the construction firm is just dealing with very thin margins, right, but they have big issues because if they give access to the wrong people, they can gain access to very confidential building plans, reports, and that type of thing, right? So the delegation of the project groups, and then enabling the setting and the management of passwords, because it's very expensive. And as you might know, passwords, when they're set by help desk, is one of the leading vectors for the fraudulent access of credentials. That's where the credentials are stolen, right? So getting it out of the hands of the help desk is both productivity and a security thing as well. And on all of these kind of things, it just really comes to the point like how we're working at scale now, we're working on a global business. How can I make this work at scale? And so, do you want to go from here?
Why not? Thank you.
Thank you.
Am I on? I'm on. Wonderful. So I'm going to bounce around a couple of basic concepts again and bring you back to something actionable. So going through a couple of basic concepts. How do you create Azure NAD? In order for any of this to be practical, to be interesting, you need to get those accounts up there. In many cases, companies start out by manually creating accounts, either through PowerShell or through UI. Just type in a bunch of usernames or use PowerShell to upload a CSV, and it's all wonderful. It doesn't scale. You can very easily, though, automatically set up your accounts in Azure AD. You can do that using synchronization. How many of you have gone to Andreas's and Jen's session earlier today about Azure AD Connect? Not that many. I urge you to go see it online later. It's a wonderful session, and it will tell you really how to quickly connect your AD on premises for both SSO and synchronization into Azure AD. But that's one option. There are others. A lot of companies are now moving their HR practices to the cloud, so Why not to be able to just automatically provision accounts from HR into Azure AD? That one we'll focus on in a second. And finally, you can always write your own application that generates Azure AD accounts. All of Azure AD's capabilities are exposed through Identity Graph. There are plenty of sessions on that as well. So let's talk about inbound provisioning. We talked about outbound provisioning before. That was where accounts from Azure AD were created in all those passkey applications in order for users to get into them. With inbound provisioning, you can now take your HR system and automatically create accounts in Azure AD from there. So how does that work? Well, the setup is the same as the inbound provisioning one. You need to provide Azure AD with information about your HR system subscription, in this case Workday. You provide the administrator username and password, or an administrator-enabled username and password account with the Workday URL into Azure AD, and that reads accounts from Azure AD, from Workday, provisions them in Azure AD. It doesn't just do that initial provisioning, it also continues to update them. So if you go into the HR tool in a couple of days and change your last name, that change will be reflected in Azure AD and through Azure AD into all of those other SaaS applications we discussed earlier. We also bring in groups. A lot of HR systems have the notion of organizational structure or provisioning groups. In Workday's provisioning groups, we bring those groups, provision them in Azure AD, and synchronize their membership ongoing. Finally, we can take all of those accounts that you just took from Workday and actually bring them down to your AD on premises. So in this case, you can automatically provision accounts from Workday HR system into AD on premises, have the user on their first day of work come in, log into their domain joined PC after doing password reset. We make sure that the whole thing is secure because the password is only created and stored in AD, so the password is yours in your environment. But we'll continue to refresh all those other attributes, all those HR-generated attributes from Workday through Azure AD onto your premises. So you can now, remember, in less than 5 minutes, set up your environment so you're automatically provisioning accounts. When someone is hired into the company, an account is automatically provisioned all the way down to your AD. When somebody leaves the company, the account is automatically disabled all the way down to your AD. And if somebody changes positions in the company or changes other information, that information is reflected across the entire system. Less than 5 minutes. I urge you to go and play with it. I want to start bringing this together, right? So now we've created accounts efficiently in Azure AD. We've started to connect Azure AD out to other applications. But let's be real. In most cases, there isn't a single individual who knows all 10,000 people that should have access to Salesforce in the marketing department, at least in very large companies. And so that delegation model, it works well, but it has its own place, not for every scenario. In some cases, we need other tools in order to decide who has access. And especially as we scale up, we need those tools to scale up with us. And so in addition to delegated access management, there is always the paradigm of administrator-managed assignment. That one scales even less. But there are other ones. You can create assignment rules into all of these applications. And you can base them either on attributes in Azure AD, which automatically process membership, or on an external system. In other words, if you have a set of groups in your AD on premises that are already maintained in some way, or the example I gave earlier of the provisioning groups from Workday, then you can assign those groups to applications, and through that, really scale your system, make it live on its own. I'll show you a little bit what that means in a second, but I just wanted to touch on the assignment options. As you start playing with it, you'll see that in different places, when you click Assign, you get different options. So in some applications, they support roles and they're deeply integrated with Azure AD. When you click Assign, you get the option to actually assign the role or the permissions in that application. In other cases, you're really only assigning permission to access, and somebody will need to manage the permissions within the application separately. And finally, you can also use the same paradigm to assign a SKU or a license of Microsoft products. Okay, so going a little bit further on this notion of rule-based assignment. We're using groups for rule-based assignment. We chose to use groups here instead of creating arbitrary rule structures because they hold very well across all of the information systems. All systems on-premises know how to deal with groups. Most of the cloud services have a notion of groups. They just carry really well. They're also a convenient container to let you create a single rule and share it across multiple applications, also to be able to delegate those permissions, as we mentioned earlier. Now, we mentioned external, and we gave a couple of examples. The more interesting ones are attribute-based groups. This is where you can now take a set of attribute conditions, define group membership based on that, assign that group to one or more applications, and from that point on, the membership of that application, the users who have access to that application or that license, continues to update automatically. A little bit about how to design a rule. Rules can be very simple, contain a single clause and a single condition. We make the UI really trivial for that. It's a drop-down to define the condition, and you're done. We also give you the opportunity to create more complex rules. You can create rules that contain any number of clauses and conditions. And all of the operators listed on the right side are the tools that you can use for that. There's also good documentation for this online if you want to read up a little more. But I'll take you through the process. I want to create a rule where all sales managers around the world and all marketing users in Greece, and we chose Greece, of course, for Nasos Kladakis, they all get access to an application. And so we see there are 3 conditions in this rule. We can easily set up those 3 conditions. Job title equals sales manager, department equals marketing, and country equals Greece. This is not enough because the conditions are actually set up paired. And so what we'll want to do is introduce the clauses. And what we're now saying is that all sales managers and anyone who meets the description of Nasos. Okay. Questions about this? Good. Moving on. Moving on and quickly. So how do you get this done? Remember, everything we're doing here can be done in under 5 minutes. Go off today, start playing with it. So how does this work? You create a security group. You design your rule. That's the process that takes the longest time. It requires some thinking. It could take several minutes. You configure that rule on the group. You assign the group to the application. And then if you want to make sure we're not cheating, you can compare the results. And you'll see on your Azure AD UI which users are assigned by that rule. And you'll see on the application which users were provisioned based on that rule. Moving on. So you can turn this on by enabling dynamic group management on the group that you just created. By enabling advanced group features on the configuration tab in Azure AD, then creating a new group, enabling dynamic group management on that group, and we'll want to apply that complex rule we just created, so you can change to advanced rule, paste that rule in, save button, and from now on the rule is operating. You can click over to the users tab really quickly. You will see the right list of users show up there. Cool. So now we've created rule-based assignments. Now we're really cooking with fire, right? Now we can run quickly. We are automatically provisioning accounts from the source systems. We're automatically assigning them to the right applications. Things are really, really running. And the result at the end looks like this. Azure AD now becomes kind of your hub, right? You can provision accounts into Azure AD from a variety of sources. Accounts show up there based on the rules that you define. We process those rules for you on an ongoing basis. And based on those rules, we push out to the applications. And as I mentioned before, based on those rules, you can also decide to write back to AD on premises. So that's a big picture. Now, in 5 minutes, each and every one of these things can be done in less than 5 minutes. The collection will take you 25.
So, as I said, self-service password reset is really a kind of a big win that can be set up quite quickly. You can define your policies. Works on any device in any location. And it works also natively within the O365 experiences as well, that people are very comfortable with. You can customize with your branding and your help desk contact. It's super simple to pilot and roll it out, and it's configurable. So you can say it's office phone, it's mobile phone, it's alternate email, security questions, whatever are the different gate that you might want to have. And then you can also say whether admin adds the gates or the end users do, and when they'll be asked to do that registration. And through all this, you get reporting on all these components that we've talked about. You can see what the state of the registration is and what the state of the password changes are. And this is one of the core pieces of this whole thing of basically to gain the value we've been talking about. You can begin to manage your passwords in Active Directory in less than 5 minutes, right? You go to AD Connect, that talk that Iran had mentioned, the AD Connect talk, you can see how that all fits together, but there's a simple checkbox in there that says enable password write back. Then you go to your licenses and enable your users with the premium licenses. The users, either you administratively update the users' registration information, or you fill out or you have a user do that within the user portal, and then you go look at Active Directory and you see the passwords being changed, right? So as quickly as that, you're enabling the availability of password reset for your organization outside of your network. And it works with both the federation and the password sync. It enforces the policies of Active Directory. So if you set something up like no naughty words, a certain length, a certain strength, the history, all those things are enforced through the password change, right? And a reset. Everything happens in real time, even though the user is on the internet, is securely interacting with Active Directory and ensuring that the right policies are there. There's no poking holes in your firewall, and all traffic is over HTTPS. And what we always make sure that you know that the private key is in your hands. Microsoft never sees that, right? And the integrated security policies are built in for anti hammering, throttling, and notifications. So this is a big time saver right away, right? And it enables you to really swiftly get your users into a position where they are reducing your costs and increasing their productivity. So very simple to pilot it. You can set controls within the admin portal to set a certain group of users to get started with it. Make sure the users are licensed, and then they register and they can begin to go. What we find oftentimes, in fact, the Workday scenario is where you sync data from on-prem. Oftentimes now with the Workday integration with Azure AD, the company is getting the mobile phone at the time of the registration and the creation of the user. So that's an example of that mobile phone gets synced to the Azure AD and supports the authentication flow, verification flow. So now we'll move to our third act, if you will, right? And the focus here is more like, hey, we've been doing these things, we've been given this access, users are really enabled. It only took me a couple minutes to get it started. But what this particular media company in France, up to that time, all their users had only worked within CorpNet, right? So they only worked in CorpNet. The company rolled out O365, and suddenly the users literally like, hey, I love working from home. I want to start to work from home, but I need to gain access to internal labs. So the IT department needed to modernize IT because they couldn't live in the world of everybody had to be on the network, and that O365 experience drove that, right? The second one was, okay, now users are coming in, so this was a service provider that, again here, the users were coming in, but they were looking at sensitive customer data through this process, and they had to add multi-factor authentication to ensure that those users are getting a second factor of auth, and then they could address their PCI compliance requirement. They had to do that before they could make progress at all. And the final one here was really the one that has been driven a lot of the reporting and the efforts we have in there. It's a technology company that we work closely with outside of Microsoft, they had reports of anomalous logins. And so their IT department said, hey, we have to look at not only our company and our sister companies to make sure that, like, what's going on here? We're under attack, right? And so basically, the anomalous reporting capability gave them that functionality. But even more importantly, the ability to integrate with security incident event management or SIEM tools was important. And as this is a quote that I've heard a lot. I just heard yesterday talking with the customer. SIEM, forensics, analysis tools, we have one of everything, right? And so don't give me another one, right? So the core of this piece here is like, how do you integrate and ensure that the APIs are available so that it becomes a holistic view and we support our customers in that direction.
So, security. Security is fun. Security often requires multi-factor authentication because if you really want to know who the user is, you're going to force them to do multi-factor authentication. What I didn't show you before is that that user that approved the access, Audrey Oliver, she's required to do multi-factor authentication. And she is because she has access to some sensitive applications. And while it's great, multi-factor authentication is integrated with Azure AD, and it's all built in, it was easy to set up, she complains about it all the time. I mean, every time she logs into her computer, she needs to pull out her phone. It's nice, I got a push notification here, I can just approve it. But still, what a pain. So, we do the math. Why do we really need to require multi-factor authentication on Audrey's account? Well, we really need it because Audrey has access to some sensitive applications. Which applications are sensitive? Audrey is in marketing. She has access to Salesforce customer partner data, that one. Well, she has access to an on-premises application. It happens to be her timesheet. It's personal information. We have to protect that one. And she also has access to Twitter. And let's be serious. Twitter is pretty sensitive. So let's take a look at them. We'll start with Salesforce. And instead of now requiring the multi-factor authentication from Audrey all the time, I wasn't an administrator. Instead of requiring that multi-factor authentication from Audrey all the time, what we can actually do is require the multi-factor authentication when accessing those more sensitive applications. As you can see, we take access control very seriously. I can't even do my demo. So going back, we'll take a look at Salesforce. Now, we've set up Salesforce in advance mostly because I'm lazy. So under the Configure tab, I can see that wonderful conditional access rule. And if I scroll all the way at the bottom, I can see that it's actually only to specific users. And it's because not every user that accesses Salesforce accesses sensitive information. So we're really limiting it only to those groups that are assigned to the sensitive Salesforce roles. So now everything works together. If you move into marketing, you automatically get added to that group, and you automatically get better permissions in Salesforce. You automatically get enforced with MFA just when you access Salesforce. So life is good. Everything fits together and we're happy. We could do the same thing, of course, as I mentioned, to the application I published from on-premises. So that's my timesheet app. And the nice thing here is that this is an application on-premises, but I can access it from any mobile device, anytime, at any location without needing to VPN in. Of course, we want to protect that. But we can protect the access to that application specifically in the same way. This one we do broadly. Anyone who accesses this application needs to do MFA. And the third one is Twitter. Now, we haven't protected Twitter until now because those users that had Twitter were enforced with MFA. But since Audrey was complaining, we're going to do something about it. And so I just wanted to show you how simple it is. All users. No, it's not all users, right? It's specific users. It's those users that don't just have access to Twitter, but have access to the enterprise Twitter account. Enterprise social apps. That's that same group that Keith earlier asked to be joined to. And we want to always require multi-factor authentication. Of course, we could have limited it in a variety of ways. We enabled the rule, and we're done. Remember, I said everything we're showing you here can be done in minutes. Right? So I just set a conditional access on a specific application. It happens to be on a shared account for a specific application. So it's a very fine-grained conditions. And I didn't need to spend hours defining the rules and setting them up across the various systems. Now, because we did all of that, I also want to go through and remove multi-factor authentication requirements from Azure herself. So next time she logs in and doesn't access one of these more sensitive applications, she's not forced to do MFA, and she stops complaining. So we go to the users here. We search for Audrey. And we disable multi-factor authentication. Done, done, and done. And now I have to log out to show you that reality is actually what I promised. Oh, as I mentioned, I log into Outlook. My applications are right here. I click on the timesheet app. There was a problem. It was the wrong app. So I'll click on Salesforce. Folks, the demo gods are not with me today. My suspicion is that I don't have good context, so we'll see in a second. The cost of doing these demos is that I end up switching a lot of accounts across a lot of windows, and sometimes this is not normal usage, and sometimes I lose context in my sessions. So we'll give it one more try and then move on. Okay, we'll try to revisit this later. In hopes of saving some time, let's go and explain some of these things. So I introduced a couple of concepts. There was an application there that was published from on-premises. This is an application I can log into without needing to VPN in. How do we do that? Well, we don't want you to need to poke inbound halls through your firewall. That's effectively VPN. There are a lot of fancy names for it. Per app VPN, per se, it still requires the user to ingress, to come from the internet into your network, which means that either you have to do a lot of setup around that VPN to fence only that application in, or the user is now on the network, and it's not that necessarily that user is malicious, but you've exposed them to more than you needed to. And so you're reducing your own security. Well, with the Azure AD application proxy, web application proxy, you can just simply publish those applications out. Right? You do this by downloading and installing a simple app on a number of computers. You can install that app on as many computers as you want. The app establishes a secure outbound for SSL session against Azure Active Directory. And anytime that the user wants to authenticate to an application, they go to Azure Active Directory, click on the icon, get authenticated by Azure AD. If needed, get a second factor or device conditions. I'll talk about that in a second. And then, only then, the proxy goes and retrieves the web page or the API information back to that user. And so this is a real easy way. And again, you can set this up in less than 5 minutes. That means that I know it took you months to set up your very fancy VPN solution. You can publish one application out in 5 minutes and see if you like it. How to get started? So how to do it in 5 minutes? First of all, you turn on the application proxy under the Azure Active Directory Configure tab. You go and add an application. You install the agent on one or more computers on premises. You grab the local application. The agent doesn't need to be installed on the computer that's running that application, just needs to be installed on the computer that can access that application. You grab the URL for the application, set it, and add a proxy application in Azure AD, set up that URL, and assign it to users. And you're done. Under 5 minutes, you've now published an application out securely and assigned it securely to individuals, and if you want, protected it with conditional access. So what is conditional access? Conditional access is the notion that under certain conditions, I will apply additional parameters in letting you in or letting you or not letting you into an application. Those additional conditions could be user conditions. Who are you? For example, we narrowed it down to a group. Or how have you authenticated before? Have you done MFA already in this session today or not? They could be device conditions. Is your device known to us at all? Is it managed? Is it compliant with our MDM policy? It could be conditions specifically to the application, right? Is the security, is the information stored in the application highly sensitive? And finally, it could be other conditions. You know, there's always an other bucket. And stuff like, what's the risk profile of this user given their recent activity? For example, I usually work in Redmond. Recently, I traveled to Japan. My risk profile is higher than in usual cases, and I might be prompted to MFA until the system understands that it's only me working from another location. How does this work? You set up the conditions into rules and apply them to specific applications, as you've seen in the demo, and you're done. Under 5 minutes. Conditional access today has a few sets of features available already in production and preview. With Office 365, you can set both device and multi-factor conditions for Office 365 Exchange and SharePoint applications. With Azure AD Premium, you get a much more comprehensive, much more broad ability. User MFA conditions, as well as the inside or outside your corporate network conditions. And you can apply those to any application, not just Office 365 applications. And finally, conditional access is also included in Windows Server AD. You have a few more capabilities there around devices right now, known devices as opposed to managed devices. Setup is a little bit more complex as well. Because of that, I want to focus specifically on the Azure AD Premium and basic aspects of conditional access. Because again, what I want to show you right now is how you can achieve conditional access, as you've seen, in 30 seconds, not in 5 minutes. You've added your application, you've configured it. You go to the application configuration tab, select the conditional access section, enable the rule if you want to, set the rule up for a select audience through groups. You can also add exclusion parameters. So you can say, everybody who's a member of this group except for the CEO, because he gets really irritated, or she. You can then select what the rule does. Require MFA only when you're out, or maybe don't let any user access to this application if they're off of CorpNet. And finally, you enable it. And that's it. So this is in less than a minute. Monitoring and reporting. Monitoring and reporting is the neatest feature because you actually only need to enable it. So I don't even have a slide here that says you have to take these 4 steps, and no promises about it taking you less than 5 minutes. You just need to enable the reporting feature in your system. In Azure AD, we provide you very comprehensive reporting information. We collect it from a lot of sources: internal usage, application usage, sources that are unique to Microsoft, like Microsoft's Digital Crime Unit. How many of you are aware of Microsoft's Digital Crime Unit? Have you ever read those neat articles that say Microsoft and other companies have now participated in bringing down this botnet or malware? Have you heard those? For Microsoft, that's our digital crimes unit. They have a lot of techniques they use to help governments and other organizations police the internet. Nasus's favorite story is about how they use honeypots. These are unprotected computers they put out on the internet. They attract malware like crazy. They get infected very quickly. The digital crime unit can then backtrack this information back to the malware controller, get a dump of all of the devices that were infected by this instance, by this variant of the malware. We get that data and we can correlate it with your user's usage. So even if a user logged in from their grandma's computer in another state, which is not a corporate managed computer, and they only accessed email, it will show up in your report if that computer was infected with malware that was identified. Cool? Come on, isn't this nice? I'm looking for a little more excitement. Thank you. I really appreciate it. We provide you this analysis through a number of means. We do simple rule-based analysis, and you'll see in a second in the types of report, it's very straightforward. We also, in addition to pulling in that special data, we also do machine learning-based analysis. And we do our everybody now does machine learning. How many booths that you stopped by said something about machine learning? Really? Wow. Well, machine learning is a very popular term in the industry right now, so we also do machine learning. We do our machine learning in 2 tiers. That means we scrutinize your behavior, or your user's behavior specifically, where you're logging in from, which devices, time of day. And if something stands out, we'll let you know this stands out. If something looks bad, we'll let you know this looks really bad. But we also scrutinize it in terms of their immediate organization. So we're an identity organization. We look at the directory and say, oh, look, this individual is logged in for China. That's weird. They don't work in China. Oh, but look, every other individual in their team also logged in China, from China. This is maybe weird, but it's not the end of the world. The team must be traveling to China. Okay, so we take that machine learning and do this in terms of the user and the organization. All of this brings down a lovely set of reports that allow you to access all of the activity and usage in your directory, everything from administrative activity all the way through to users log into an application. In addition to all of that, we give you a lovely set of security reports. These are very exciting because these, as I mentioned before, sometimes in many cases give you access to analysis and data that you may not have access to, or the complexity to set up in other cases is too high. And so we give you these reports, and we don't just give you the reports, we enable actions off of these reports. And so if you see that that user did something really weird, you can immediately require that from now on they do MFA until we all clear this up. Or maybe it's not that concerning, let's just scramble the password. And you're confident that they're the only ones that can reset their password because you enabled SSPR with 2 gates, and you're very happy with it. But these reports are not just available for you in the portal and to take actions on that way. They're also available for downloads, so you can do a deeper analysis on Excel or other applications. And they're available through APIs. So with the reporting APIs, these are simple to integrate RESTful APIs. The endpoint is mentioned here. They're going to be finally delivered through the common identity graph. Right now, they're on an independent endpoint, as you can see. Oh, no, they're not. They're already there. And in addition to delivering you all of that report information, they also include the ability to scope and target what you're looking for. And so you can filter based on a time frame. In other words, watermark and keep getting just the freshest information into whatever system you're integrating them. Or you can scope to a specific type of event or a specific user, let's say the executive team. You really want to watch that one closely because they tend to have access to more things. This is what the data looks like. What I've done here is I highlighted the tags. This happens to be a data sample from an audit report. You can see the data stream that you get is in XML. You can see who performed an action, what kind of action, on what type of resource. And then depending on the event, there may be additional information on the various objects that participate in the event or on the action. What is this all good for? Well, with this, you can integrate Azure AD reporting data into any of your existing tools. And here we have an example of Azure AD reporting data, audit report data integrated with Splunk. And so whatever existing tool you use on premises or in the cloud, you can very easily pull your directory activity, your security information into that tool and add it to your analysis, trigger existing workflow systems off of it, et cetera, et cetera. That's it. Questions? Thank you, Keith.
So the focus here today was to help you kind of know what is possible, right? And then to be able to take take some actions that are possible. So hope that was good for you. Want to make sure we'll take a look at. Oh, wrong way here. There's a number of related content that you might want to take advantage of, either while the shows are still here or when they're online. And as well, I'd like to share with you there's a challenge sweepstakes here, right? So I want to make sure that all of you can learn about that, take the challenge, right? Enter the session code. As you attend the sessions, you track your progress, and we're giving out some cool prizes associated with that. And you don't even have to wait for that to get a prize, because we actually brought some cool posters with us. Okay, this poster here is everything we've talked about in one page, right? And so, please, if you feel, we have a bunch of them. Feel free if you want to bring them back for yourself or for your peers. They're here for you. So, any questions?
Sir, could you help us with the question microphone? Thank you.
Can you support multiple domains with one active Azure Active Directory server?
Absolutely. In all definitions of the word domain,
take
so
a
both
bunch,
in
I can share.
both in terms of
Thank you.
both in terms of
DNS domains.
Yeah, so definitely DNS domains as well as Active Directory domains, no problem.
With one server.
With one instance of the service.
Instance, yes.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
No problem. Folks, as you're leaving, we hope this was useful for you. Please rate us. Favorable ratings are always appreciated. Unfavorable ratings are appreciated if they come with the constructive feedback. Thank you very much for your time. Please.
Next question.
Going back to the application proxy stuff, it sounds really good, but to the 5-minute point, it seems like there's some oversimplification on what it takes to get that proxy agent software to integrate locally with whatever app is on that box. Is it?
Is that from your experience?
No, I'm asking, like, is there detail you can get into there?
Yeah, absolutely. I can show you that in 5 minutes in the booth. Anyone who's interested will do that this afternoon, just to prove the point. It's not an oversimplification. It's a 3-screen wizard to install the agent on the box. You have to log in with an administrative account from your tenant. Automatically configures that agent for your tenant.
Thanks, everybody.
All other configuration is done from Azure AD by adding the application managing it.
I guess the question is, how does the application become aware of the agent and the interconnectivity?
The application does not need to be aware of the agent. The agent needs to have access to the application, and that's it.
The agent's just making the web request in his behalf, right? And getting back the response and then sending it up.
And it brings that back the identity information from the user to support federated or Windows integrated authenticated applications.
Okay.
It's not an oversimplification. It's in under 5 minutes, I promise you.
Okay.
Other questions?
Anybody ever done that with TFS?
Oh, did we stop doing them?
No, I have to look into it. The question was, did anyone ever publish TFS out this way? We haven't tested it, but I personally haven't, so I don't know. I'll check with the team, and we'll have the answer at the booth.
Hey, the web app discovery agent, instead of yet another agent that we have to manage, any chance of integrating that with the SCCM agent so we have all software inventory kind of in one view, and then maybe that can export to Azure from the SCCM database?
Well, we're definitely looking into that as a part of the EMS suite, but there are no specific plans on that yet. Okay. Thank you.
2 questions. One is on the self-service sign password reset. The user is actually keying their credentials, their corp credentials, into Microsoft site, or this is through ADFS?
So the password reset itself, so password change and password reset with write back, the user is entering the in-clear password into a portal that is hosted in the cloud. It's in an HTTPS session, and that password gets written back strictly to AD over a twice encrypted channel, HTTPS plus asymmetric key for content.
Okay, and then my other question was about other write-back capabilities. My understanding, just from talking to other folks, was that write-back was like the password thing, but other things weren't doing write back yet, or everything can write back to AD, or what's the?
Users are in user write back is in preview. I mentioned that in the Workday inbound side. It's in preview with the latest AAD Connect PP public preview 2 release, which was a month ago. Play with it. Let us know what you think. Write back of other object types is on the way.
You mentioned that domain. You said domain in every sense of the word. A number of domains can be rolled up into Azure Active Directory.
Into a single instance of Azure Active Directory.
A single instance, yeah. So
I'm afraid you might challenge me now on using every sense of the word. So we'll see.
There's a client that I have that's still on Novell, and he actually said, "I want to make sure I'm not the last person on Novell," and I had to restrain myself from saying you're too late because you are.
Yeah.
But,
might be the last person.
Is it possible to roll up the domain directory that he has for Novell into that? And
yeah, off the top, it is possible, though not trivial. It's not in the 5-minute bucket.
Sure.
But definitely in the possible bucket. In general, this is mostly about synchronizing account information, and you can certainly use any number of our identity synchronization tools in order to connect from that Novell directory up to Azure AD, but it's not in the bucket of trivial to deploy, unfortunately.
Sure.
Because that is the last person, probably, so. Any other questions?
Groups, is that federated to the AD groups or only groups?
Okay. The question the gentleman asked was, well, for the 5 people remaining in the room, was self-service group management, is that only for Azure AD groups or also for AD on-premises groups? Right now, today, it's only for Azure AD groups. I mentioned a second ago, group write-back is on its way. It's coming soon, and that feature will be exposed to AD on-premises groups as well.
Would that be in Azure AD Connect required to have that, or would that be Azure AD Premium functionality?
So you will use the same Azure AD Connect for all levels of functionality, but the ability to do self-service group management in general is a premium capability, and the ability to write back groups will also be a part of the premium subscription. Thank you. Sorry, there was a question at the microphone. I think he beat you to it. You cut the micro? That's really mean. It's really mean.
Yeah. 2 questions about groups. How the group membership is computed? It is because the user as a new is compliant with the rules in the groups, or the groups must check every user to see which user must be member? So
the dynamic group mechanism actually cycles in the background for you and checks the delta stream on the directory to see whether any user information was changed and do they now meet the criteria. Every few seconds. Every few seconds. That's exactly the point. You don't have to worry about it. It's running in our hosted environment. It's running very aggressively. And so, don't take my word for it. Just go and see how quickly those groups are updated. In seconds. Right. We've been doing identity and access management for a long time, and we've been doing that originally on software, in which case we had to give you all the capabilities in the world for you to set up all variants of the solution, and you ended up running, in many cases, very highly complex things on very small computers. What we're doing now is, by the way, the same teams that used to work on Forefront Identity Manager are now working on Azure AD Premium. And so what we're doing now is we're taking care of that. We're running it for you. Don't worry about it. I'm not saying trust me. I'm saying the proof is in the results.
We have also 2 questions. You said that we can create groups in Azure AD.
Mm-hmm.
We have a limit in AD of number of groups for a user.
Yeah. Security groups. So security groups in AD have a problem. They hit limits on the token effectively. In this, so so which limits are you concerned with?
We have size token.
Yeah, token bloat.
The number of groups that the user
In general.
yes.
Uh,
1,000
in Azure AD, we don't have those constraints. And so with write-back, what we recommend is that you manage how many groups you write back. Now, we keep making improvements to Active Directory on premises as well. It's not like it's an abandoned product. It continues to release in new versions. And so if we see that this becomes a core issue, I'm confident that we'll do work to improve on it. What we're doing for that boundary is you can manage which groups are written back and which are not. So you can create as many groups as you want in the cloud and use as many of them as you want in the cloud. In the cloud, there is no limit. There is an object count limit that depends on your relationship with Microsoft. A default tenant with Azure AD free is limited to, I want to say, 60,000 objects. Tenants with any paid subscription go up in size with your needs.
There is no limit as we have in Azure.
Isn't it nice to pass the problem to us? Other questions?
Azure AD Sync and then the new, is that being replaced by the Azure AD?
Oh, thank you very much, sir. Okay, yes.
Oh, really? Because we.
No, don't worry about it. Azure AD Connect is a tool that simplifies deployment. It actually includes Azure AD Sync in it, but it wraps up a whole bunch of different things. So it's not like you're on the wrong thing. You're good to be on Azure AD Sync. Azure AD Connect is still in preview. The natural upgrade to the next version of Azure AD Sync will take you into Azure AD Connect.
Which is Azure AD Sync to do the directory syncing and then all the other components.
And configuration and monitoring of ADFS and other components as well.
We
Yes.
don't use ADFS, so it may not matter.
But additional capabilities. So the natural upgrade of AAD Sync will take you into AAD Connect, even if you don't need those other capabilities. It replaces it inherently. It's just a part of Azure AD Connect. It's the same component exactly. Cool.
Yes, thank you.
Happy to.
Couple multifaceted question about provisioning accounts. So
I think you're the last person.